this could be regulating around our family. It could also really apply to other people as well. So let's just, as a little reminder, we'll go back to the ladder. So the dorsal vagal at the bottom of the ladder is our most primitive defense system, and it really just is freeze, collapse. It's what the reptiles have done, and that's part of our reptile, kind of our brainstem response. We collapse, we shut down. And then the sympathetic response is fight and flight. And so if we're feeling a fight response, that's we're aroused, we're not in freeze. So this also is the hypervigilance, the racing thoughts, the catastrophic thinking. This is all part of that. And then as we come up to the higher level capacity, and this is more of what makes us human, is the ventral vagal system, of where we feel really trusting and connected, and we're not isolated in our own kind of bubble. We feel connected and like it's safe to be connected in the world. And one of the things that Stephen Porges talks about is if there's a feeling change, there's autonomic change. So it's this bi-directional thing again, where we can monitor our nervous system and notice what's happening in our nervous system as a clue to what's going on in our thoughts and feelings. And we can notice it the other way as well. So it's kind of like if we're feeling anxious and we take some deeper breaths, then it helps to change our nervous system as well. The big thing is to remember that this is involuntary. So if you go into a fight response, it's involuntary. It's your nervous system trying to protect you. And as we change our experience, and as we have more experience with people and more direct experience of trust, then we gradually change our responses as well. And the other really important thing about this is that they go from top to bottom. It's hierarchical. So if we're feeling really threatened, our ventral vagal is not going to be working. We're going to go into some kind of a fight or flight response. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to go into a freeze or a shutdown. In order to get out of freeze and shutdown, we need to go into some kind of activation. And then from there, hopefully we can go into a more grounded, trusting place. So as you're doing these inquiries, just to be keeping some of these questions, just noticing what's your nervous system telling you right now? What is your body doing? What does it want to do? What's your breath doing? Kind of keep an eye on that at that level. So this is the situation as humans who've had this evolving nervous system, is that trust and connection are really important to us. And it feels like a survival level threat if we don't have that. And our ideas about families are really often different from what our actual experience is with our families. And we can refer back to, this isn't what I feel like I'm the most regulated person around. Like everybody else just gets to go off, and I'm the only one who's even trying to be regulated, or trying to kind of keep some not calmness necessarily, but keep some regulation here. And so often the impression that we have is very different from what the reality is what we feel. And when we have family get-togethers, which some will this time and some won't this time because of COVID, and that could be a really big change. It might be like every single year, I've done this for decades. Or it could be, well, I'm always alone at Christmas, or I always feel isolated at Christmas. The thing about holidays, whether we're celebrating, it's our usual Hanukkah celebration, or any other kind of get together, for some it's winter solstice, for some it's Christmas. What we know about big family get togethers in particular is that there's usually a lot of chaos and pressure. And a lot of times people are really struggling. And how can we kind of just be realistic about, this is my situation, and I don't have to do this perfectly. I could actually kind of think about it. What do I want to do? What's my situation? And how could I kind of move through this? So speaking of the unrealistic expectations that we have, so some of these are are clearly not real. Like the picture of Friends and the Golden Girls. There might have been some friendships in there, but for a lot of it, it's not true. Like what we see online and on screens isn't true. And then some of them, like Oprah and Gail, and some of the people, they do seem to have real life friendships that we hear about and we see, and sometimes they talk about. And that still doesn't mean that we're seeing the whole picture. Usually, people don't talk about the hard stuff so much. And then we have this feeling about romance the same. So some of these images are from movies and some of them are from real life. And all of them are not really representative of what a real romantic relationship looks like. So it's very easy for us to think about or to feel like we're not quite measuring up somehow. All of these are kind of in the mix when we're talking about relationships and connection and trust. And one of the things that Stephen talked about was that really the highest goal of humans is to be able to be immobilized without fear. So if you look at some of these pictures, there's body contact. It's intimacy. If you can be immobilized without fear, you're not trying to get away, it's intimacy. If you're immobilized with fear, then that's something completely different. And so our nervous systems, again, have to be in the state of ventral vagal, of trust and connection before being hugged like this or being connected like that feels like it's okay. So, again, to be realistic, that family attractions, relationships can be really triggered by unhealthy family dynamics. Some people are bossy, some are scapegoating. We bring in, with sibling relationships in particular, we bring in all kinds of dysfunctional behavior. So we have these experiences where, we're in these relationships that often don't feel very nourishing. And sometimes they feel like we really need to protect ourselves. And then our nervous system does that for us. So here's the inquiry part. So we'll slow down here and take some time. So the idea, and we need to be in ventral vagal, the highest state, the trust and connect state. Our nervous system has to feel safe before we can feel compassion. It also has to feel safe before we can feel creativity and play and all kinds of kind of higher human development. It has to happen in the ventral vagal part of us. So when we're in that state, then we're naturally regulated and we have more resilience. And we also have, we also get knocked out of that a lot because we're triggered by things. So this whole inquiry really is about what triggers us and takes us out of that calm, regulated nervous system, and how can then we get back into it. But to first, let's just look at some of these situations. So the ideal is that we can really see another person's dysregulated system as something that's going on with them. It really doesn't have anything to do with us, or it's not a personal statement about us. It's something that's going on in their nervous system. So how could we maintain our own regulation? And I thought we could do a couple of minutes here of pulling up some examples. So if you hear that snarky tone or the contempt on their face, see if you could bring something up and notice your response to it. So, not trying to stay grounded or anything like the moment, just to bring something up. What are some situations where you went into a fight or flight response, or you went into freeze? And bring it up as an image, or bring it up and just see, what is that? What are the circumstances? And take some deeper breaths. Remind yourself that you're looking at a memory, that you're actually not in the situation. And would it make any difference if you were to remind yourself that they are in a fight response, that they're lashing out? And it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's something going on in their nervous system. Does that make a difference to acknowledge that? And on the opposite end of the response could be if somebody gets into a dorsal freeze, maybe they're saying, "Oh, this always happens to me. People always let me down. I'm so horrible." They get into kind of a tunnel of shame, or they just can't kind of get themselves out of that and relate. They're not connecting with us when they're in that state. They're really kind of locked in their own shame storm or whatever it might be. So notice that too. That has a different feeling than when somebody fights and lashes out at us. But it's also, there's no connection there. So bring that, something like that, to mind too. It could be a recent experience or something from a long time ago, whatever comes to mind. And then notice if there's compassion here for them and also for you. So we know how it feels to be calm and relaxed and trusting and connected. And then something happens to take us out of that. And so, whether you're thinking about someone else or you're thinking about yourself, what's your relationship with that experience? Could you have compassion for yourself? Could you feel that in your heart, or compassion for them? I know what that feels like. I'm sad that that's what's happening for them. And you can let that kind of recede back a little bit and just tune back into your own nervous system. And if you want, you could even bring to mind a really wonderful connection with another person, an animal, a place. When you walk out in the morning into your garden and you feel so safe and secure and you feel the sun on your face, or when you're around a certain someone and you look into their eyes and you feel really connected. So you could also bring that forward for a minute and use that to help you kind of come more into the ventral vagal state again, connected. Notice your feet on the floor, your seat, notice your breath, your body. Move your body around a bit if you need to. And one of the things that we often notice is that other people's state has an effect on us. And that's the way it works too. So there's no one who can maintain complete regulation all the time. I think if that was the case, it would be more like you're in freeze. But just to notice, can I allow myself to acknowledge that I respond to other people? And some of this depends on attachment too. If we have been, if we've grown up with a kind of an unreliable attachment, and sometimes we felt really connected, and sometimes it was ripped away from us for no apparent reason, then we're going to have more trouble with someone who's in freeze, for instance, and who just disconnects from us, and we feel kind of lost there. Or if someone goes on the attack and we have to protect ourselves. Let's just take a minute to notice what comes up around that. our responses really make sense. So, when we are talking about regulation, we could be talking about a ventral vagal anchor, they call it. So, when we get irritated or when we get triggered and we shut down, how can we orient ourselves back to the room, remind ourselves that this is their nervous system? So, let's think about the things that are really reliable and maybe try a few just in your own experience right now. So, looking around the room, 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 census practice, a lot of people like. It might be to hug yourself, put your hand on your heart, take some deeper breaths, which may or may not feel good. If it does, you could do that. And longer term, a lot of us come to the daily practices or do other practices that help us to build resilience in our nervous system. So just to remind yourself of some anchoring practices that you do and that you could do more of maybe if you think of it. What really works? And how are you feeling right now? Are you feeling kind of in your body, connected? This is okay. And take a moment to scan. Notice if you could relax your forehead and eyebrows, mouth and jaw, neck and shoulders, your chest and your stomach. Notice your breath. So, if we have compassion for someone else, let's go back to maybe one or two of the examples that came up a few minutes ago. Somebody is speaking to you in a certain tone of voice, or they have that look on their face, or they're in a fight response. And you can put your hand on your heart if you want. Just notice if you were to say, I can see you're suffering. I can see that when you're dysregulated, you're suffering. And I know that that's the situation for me too. So I could see that you're suffering here. You're not really actually trying to mess me up. You're suffering. And that's why you're in a fight or flight or freeze response. And I can hold you. I can have compassion for you if I'm regulated. So, again, really staying in touch with your body. Notice your breath. And let's take several minutes here before we move on to the self compassion piece. And let yourself kind of bring up different examples of when people are not well regulated. And it might be something dramatic or it might be something like more like a freeze. They're not interested in me, they're not connected. And you could say a few words like, I feel compassion for you. I feel connected with you. Just try a few things out and see. And I'll be quiet for a few minutes just to let that evolve. Stay connected with your body and breath, though. And one way to work with that could be, what does their behavior or response reflect back about me? So if it's landing on a core deficiency belief, like I'm not worthy of paying attention to, nobody wants to hang around with me, nobody wants to be my friend. So if someone's in a freeze response, that might be what it brings up. So what does that say about you? Or what does it trigger in you in terms of a threat? So if someone's in a fight response, you might go into defense. You probably will. And how could you just kind of notice, what does that feel like? Why do I need to protect myself? Is that really true right now as an adult? Or could I come back to that more stable, regulated feeling of connection, even when they're not acting well? So experiment with that a little bit too. And you might move into this self compassion statement as well. I know how much suffering I get when I go into fight, flight, or freeze. And I have these natural, involuntary nervous system responses to threat, just like everybody else. And it's natural to move in and out of regulation depending on our cues for safety or cues for threat. So, one thing that we could look into is, are we shaming ourselves for having the responses that we have? So, if you have more of a fight response, it tends to get you into more trouble, and you might really feel a lot of regret about hurting people. And you also might be really seeing the effects of that, of maybe people don't want to be around you because of your fight responses, or you feel shame that you're reacting the way you are. And could you pull back from that a little bit and allow yourself to really let it in that these are involuntary responses? It's not like we don't have any agency or choice. We do. So it's not like we're saying, well, I just have a fight response, so I don't have any responsibility for that. What it is saying, though, is that when I'm stressed, when I have a lot of stuff going on, when I'm tired, when I'm afraid, when I'm not in a very calm and grounded place, then my system's going to be more reactive. And could I at least acknowledge that that's the case? Shaming never helps. it always brings us into a state of freeze or collapse where we turn on ourselves and we're not able to get back to grounded, compassionate, trusting when we're shaming ourselves. So, even just on a practical level, it's helpful to know that. And can I really acknowledge the suffering that's happened because of my nervous system responses? My own suffering, suffering of other people. And could I have compassion for myself? And compassion might be too strong of a word. It might be more, can I stay connected with myself? And then let's look into this next sentence. My system knows how to come back. So when I get into fight or flight or freeze, when I have cues of threat that I'm responding to, my defense system goes up. I'm not stable. I'm not regulated. I'm off kilter. My system knows how to come back. How does that feel? Does that feel true? We can do movement. We can orient to the present. We can relax our body, our breath. We can work with catastrophic thoughts. How much trust is there right now that you can come back into a well regulated state? We're not talking about all the evidence from the past. We're not talking about the times we've lost it on someone. We're talking about right now. So we've been kind of digging a little bit here in the inquiry. And right now, do you know how to come back? Do you trust that your system knows how to come back to groundedness, safety? You could do some breathing. You could get up and shake. You could move your body around. I trust that my system knows how to come back to regulation. And part of this is our beautiful prefrontal cortex, the cognition, the thinking part of our mind that can look at this and go, let's try this. I know this works. Let's try some breathing. Let's try the orienting. And part of it is, our adult self, inviting our adult self to be here and reassure the parts of us that are scared. Take a really close look and notice, is this really true that there's a threat here? How big is the threat? What's going on? Is it triggering something from the past? Reminding ourselves that we're not alone anymore. We have more resources. We have our adult self. And we're not powerless over this. And then let's come back to checking our nervous system again. What's going on? Where do you feel? So we've probably gone through some of the up and down the ladder in the last 20 minutes. And where are you right now? What does your body want to do? What did you learn? What surprised you? So we'll take a couple of minutes before we come back to the group. Let yourself reflect back on the exercise, the different inquiries. What was that like? What did you learn? What did you experience?